Hello, and welcome to the Small Firm's Guide to Contract Documents. Explore essential documents and provisions, a webinar brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to start off with a few administrative items before we get started with our presentation. Next slide.
Yeah.
The presentation is protected by U.S. and international copyright laws, so reproduction, distribution, and display and use of the presentation without written permission is prohibited. One quick disclaimer that is applicable to all AIA contract document webinars. This presentation and accompanying materials have been provided for general information purposes only. The information is not provided as legal advice, and we suggest you confer with legal counsel in your residing state or district. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to our presenter, Ken, to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Cobley, and I'm Vice President and Counsel for AIA Contract Documents. I've been with the AIA's Contract Documents program for about 16 years now, and I oversee a team of attorneys in the creation, development, revision of the AIA contract documents, and I work with that team of attorneys and the AIA Documents Committee, as well as a number of outside industry liaisons to complete the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this program. There are a number of learning objectives for the program. Hopefully you saw those when you signed up. Among the things that we want to cover and the takeaways we'd like for you to leave with include a discussion of the importance of having a comprehensive and coordinated set of contract documents. And there are a number of reasons for that, and we'll discuss all of that, including the ability to minimize project delays, contribute to project completion, achieve the owner's goals, etc. We also want you to become familiar with the AIA Sustainable Projects exhibit and to understand how you can use that as a tool to facilitate achieving the sustainable objective for a project and/or its certification. We want you to understand why the architect's scope of services are what they are in a sustainable project and how they're incorporated into the sustainable project exhibit. And that includes, among other things, the architect's responsibility to conduct a sustainability workshop and develop a sustainability plan, and how all of that rolls up to the ultimate objective of achievement of the sustainable objective for the project. And then finally, we'll give you some information about where you can find helpful resources and guides that can enhance your understanding of contract documents and risk management. So I'd like to start by just providing you with a little bit of history around the contract documents program. We always find that this is helpful for a number of reasons, including to give users of our documents some understanding of the rich history and the long-term development of these documents. So the American Institute of Architects began publishing standard form documents in 1888. That is not a typo. This program has been in existence for 134 years now. And from the beginning, the goal was to create documents that would reflect the practices in the best practices or the most popular practices in the construction industry. And as the years have gone by and the documents have evolved, we believe that that practice has been maintained and that these documents do in fact reflect the common best practices in the construction industry. As I said, in 1888, the AIA published one document. It was an owner-contractor agreement. It was about 3 or 4 pages long. Since then, the program has expanded to nearly 200 agreements and forms across multiple delivery models, and continues to expand and grow. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can figure out what the offerings are a little later in the program. Of course, over that time, there's also grown a substantial volume of interpretive case law, cases around the country that have interpreted the AIA's documents and or otherwise recognized their common use and the fact that they represent the industry standard. And we're very pleased about that and proud about that history and the popularity of these documents. So over the years, the development of these documents has been standardized in a fairly comprehensive and iterative process, the drafting process. And it involves a number of participants. We involve industry stakeholders, we involve AIA member resources, we engage outside folks. By that I mean folks not affiliated with the AIA, but that have our industry stakeholders and or that have subject matter expertise in areas that we're trying to tackle. And of course, there is the AIA contract documents committee. And we bring all of those forces together. The attorneys on my team do legal research, stay up on legal decisions as we can that impact the industry. We incorporate the learnings from legal decisions. We get comments from the industry. We investigate the impacts of the legal decisions and some of the trends within the industry. We then use that information to draft or revise documents. We then take the drafts, the updated drafts or the drafts of documents we've created. We send them out to industry liaisons and the documents committee as a whole for review and feedback. And ultimately, after we're satisfied that the documents have gone through a comprehensive review process, we finalize and publish them. And that process can take several years for certain documents. It's not uncommon for us to spend 2 or 3 years on documents like the A201, going through that iterative process, a couple rounds of review to make sure we're getting things right. So the purpose of this program, as indicated in the learning objectives, one of the purposes is to sort of give everybody a broad brush overview of the documents and the offerings that we have, and so that people can go to the AIA website, the contract documents website, and find what they're looking for. So one thing I'd like to talk about are the document families. We use the term document families to designate groupings of documents that are coordinated to work together and or that might focus on a particular element of project delivery. And as you can see from the screen, we have a number of groupings or families. Many of them focus around delivery models. So the conventional family, which is sort of the flagship family for the AIA document program, and its flagship single document, the A201, is based on the design bid build delivery model. We have another family for design build. Again, that's a set of coordinated documents that have been drafted to account for the way projects are delivered when we're using design build. We have the CM as advisor grouping, CM as constructor. Some of you may know that as CM at risk. We have a set of documents that we developed where the architect or some vendors are going to be involved in dealing with particular aspects of the provision of FF&E. We have a slim offering for international. It's an owner. It's a client consultant agreement, which equates to basically the owner as the client and the consultant being U.S. based architect for work on projects located outside the United States. We have a few different groupings of documents. If a project is going to be delivered using the integrated project delivery method, we have a program management series of documents. We have documents that address digital practice, and some would call it a setup for the use of building information modeling, or BIM. And then we have a number of forms that get used for contract administration. There may be a few other groupings, but these are the main groupings that we look to and that people search in to see if they can find what they're looking for a particular project. Our documents are also broken down in a different way, and that's series. So if you look at an AIA document, in the heading, the first thing you'll notice is a letter and some numbers, and we're going to talk about that. But the letters have specific meaning, and as you can see on the screen, documents that start with A, like A101 or A201, those documents generally relate to the owner-contractor relationship. B documents, like the B101 or the B103, those are documents that relate to the owner-architect relationship. C-series documents is used as a catch-all for other types of agreements. So for example, the C401 is an architect consultant agreement. And so on, and you can see the other series headings and what by topic you might find if you're looking under the series for a particular document. So for example, if you know you need an owner architect agreement, you're going to begin your search in the B series documents, if nothing else. But there are a number of tools on our website that can help you refine searches to find what you're looking for. So we just started with this. Again, you can see the number system, the series and what it stands for, and why that designation appears on a document. Then the numbers. So the first number in the sequence is to indicate, in general terms, the type of document. Is it a prime agreement? Is it agreement that goes to? Is it a document that addresses general conditions? Is it a bond, payment, performance, bid, warranty bond? Is it a sub-agreement? So for example, the A401 is the contractor subcontractor agreement. We publish a number of guides, and we usually start the designation of a guide document with the number 5. Documents that start with the 7, for example, many of you are familiar with the G702, G703. They're construction-related forms and bid documents, and so forth. So the next in the series helps you to determine which of the families or delivery models the document belongs in. Again, 1 and 2 represent the conventional. Construction manager would have number 3, whether it's construction manager as advisor or CM as constructor, and so forth. You see design build, interiors, etc. And then the last number before the N dash or hyphen is simply where that document fits in the global scheme of things. One more thing, the last group of numbers is the year of publication. So each time we update documents, we put the year of the update or that we've reissued them, so people understand whether they're working with the most recent document or when it was last updated. All right, so that's a little bit about the history of the documents program and how it's organized, how you can find certain things in the program. Let's talk a little bit about a contract in general. What is a contract, and why do small firms need contracts? So on the screen, you'll see two basic definitions of what a contract is, with some key terms highlighted in red. The first one comes from the Cornell Law School Legal Information Institute, and both are basic definitions. The first one is that a contract is an agreement between parties creating mutual obligations that are enforceable by the law. The basic elements for an agreement, a contract, to be legally enforceable are mutual assent, which equates to a valid offer and acceptance of that offer between the parties, adequate consideration, the capacity to contract, and that the purpose of the contract is legal. The restatement of contracts, which is an old treatise that gets updated periodically, but has been around for a long time, simply defines a contract as a promise or set of promises for the breach of which the law gives remedy and the performance of which the law in some way recognizes a duty, right? So with all of these concepts and highlighted terms, I think everybody understands the concept of breach of contract. Everybody understands that the parties have certain duties for performance under a contract, and that there has to be an agreement, usually an offer and acceptance. I'm going to, for example, as architects, the party might offer to provide a certain level or scope of architectural services, and the owner, project owner, may accept that offer of services, all of which gets memorialized in the terms of the agreement. There will, of course, be a memorialization of the consideration. What might the architect be paid for those services? And of course, there'll be a look into whether or not the parties signing the contract actually have the capacity to make the contract bind each other, so on and so forth. But those are the basic tenets of a contract, and why it's important for all firms, but small firms among them, to memorialize these things so that each of these elements is well understood and the parties understand exactly what they're getting in the deal. So here are some things that are important to memorialize when entering into a contract. As architects, you want to make sure that there is a well-defined basis for the architect's design, and that comes in the AIA's contracts in the first section, which is initial information, where the parties are prompted to enter certain key information about things that are important to the owner that will inform the architect's design for the project. It's also important to understand what the scope of the architect's engagement will be. Will they be doing everything from the initial concepts through contract administration and closeout, or are they only taking a portion of those responsibilities? What will the compensation be, and how will it be divided among the various phases of the contract? That all gets worked out in our documents, and that's important. It's important for the owner to understand what its obligations will be in terms of compensation. It's also important for the architect to be able to point to the contract and say, under the contract, here's what I'm due now. Ownership of the instruments of service. You know, the architect's plans and specifications are defined in our documents as instruments of service. Well, who owns them? Sometimes owners believe that simply because they're paying for the architect's services, at the end of the day, they own all of that intellectual property that is otherwise found in the instruments of service. And so it's important to have some contractual terms around who actually owns the intellectual property. Uh, in the AIA documents, the architect and its consultants retain ownership of the instruments of service and the intellectual property therein, and the owner is licensed to use those instruments of service to construct the project and to maintain it and to in the future do alterations subject to certain other terms and conditions. And then also, how might the parties terminate this agreement if circumstances arise that warrant a parting of the ways? Well, all of those things are important as business considerations, and they're important to the relationships of the parties. And so all of those things are covered in AIA documents and are really important for the parties to have memorialized, so that if something, a question occurs or a problem occurs, you can look to the contract and say, okay, here are my contractual rights. Here's how the contract says I'm supposed to handle this, or here's what the contract says was within my scope. What you're asking me to do is beyond the scope that I agreed to. Either I can't do it, or I can do it, but I'm going to need to increase my compensation because my compensation was tied to that scope. For the initial information, we often tell people it's important to get that down, because as you proceed, if the owner significantly alters a basic premise that you built your compensation model on, or that you've gone down the path for early design, you need to be able to point back to the initial information and say, this isn't what we agreed to originally. I can certainly make these adjustments, but I'm going to need some additional compensation, some more time. This is a change in scope. Let's talk a little bit about contracts and forms that might be of interest to small firms. Starting with the delivery model, the conventional delivery model, right? This is design, bid, build. This is where the owner retains an architect. The architect and its consultants prepare the drawings and specifications, the instruments of service we just talked about. The architect assists the owner in obtaining bids and proposals under our standard flagship document like the B101. The owner then awards contract to the lowest responsive bidder or negotiates the right price with a particular contractor. The contractor and surety provide bonds, and then the contractors and subcontractors build the work, usually with the architect having some involvement during the construction phase to at least observe the progress of the work. Oftentimes the architect is also involved in certifying payments and so on and so forth. And this is what we call a relationship diagram. It shows the relationships of the various parties in the conventional design, bid, build scenario, and the numbers that you see reflect various documents, agreement numbers, and so forth that could be used to memorialize these relationships. In the context of the owner and architect, you can see several agreements, the B101, the B103, 104, and 105, each of which might serve as the base contract for the owner-architect relationship. And and the other documents accordingly. So in 2027, we last updated the A201 or conventional family. This is a listing of, at the beginning, the owner contractor agreements that are part of that and how they're different. So you can see the A101 is premised on the fact that the contractor will be paid a stipulated sum to construct the project, whereas the A102 uh, is stipulated on the fact that the contractor will be paid based on the cost of the work plus a fee, but that there's going to be a guaranteed maximum price that the owner can hold the contractor to. And the 103 also costs the work, but without a guaranteed maximum price. On the owner architect side, the B101 is considered the AIA contract documents flagship owner architect agreement. That's the one that will likely fit most scenarios and is the one we point to most often. Now, what different types of owner architect agreements do we have? Well, we've got the B101, which is the one I just talked about. We also have what's called the B102, which is a standard form of agreement, but without a predefined scope of services. So unlike the B101, where we go through the several phases through design development and contract documents and bidding and procurement and CA, the B102 has a lot of business terms, but no scope. And so the parties have to include with that document some sort of written scope of services to complete the document and have it function as a working contract. B103 is an owner architect agreement that's for use with more complex projects. It envisions, for example, that the owner will retain a cost consultant along the way. There are a few other twists and turns in that document because it's envisioned for use in complex projects. The B104 is abbreviated. It doesn't have all 5 phases. It's only got 3 phases of architect services. The terms are somewhat parsed down. Many of the core features of the B101 are found in the B104, but not all of them. And B105 is a short form agreement. It's only got 2 phases. It's probably for a very, not probably, it's intended for use on a very basic, low risk, low cost project because it's got really parsed down terms. The B101, 102, 103 generally rely on the A201 to provide general conditions that apply to the architect's services, if any, during the construction phase. The B104 and 105 rely on terms that are in the coordinated A104 and 105 they incorporate the terms of the A104 and 105 by reference for any matters dealing with the construction phase of the project. We also have owner architect agreements where the architect might be providing pro bono services. We have an agreement for a developer, builder, and architect for prototypes. So this is a scenario where you have a developer builder who's got a plot of land. Perhaps they're doing a subdivision. They want to retain the architect to provide essentially permit drawings for single-family residential houses that might be constructed. There are a number of factors in this B107 that shift responsibilities that otherwise might have fallen to the architect to the developer builder. It's presumed that the developer builder is an experienced developer and understands a number of the details associated with constructing a house. Again, this is basically to get a permit set into the hands of the developer builder. There's little, if any, obligation to perform any services during the construction phase. We have the B108, which was developed in conjunction with representatives from a few of the federal agencies, and it's for use for federally funded or federally insured projects. And we also have the B109, which is an owner-architect agreement for multifamily or mixed-use residential projects. That document has a number of terms that restrict what uses can be made of the building. It is designed not to be used in a situation where the building is intended to be condominiums or might be converted to condominiums, not without some significant edits, which are found in a guide that goes with that. So how do you pick? This chart suggests that you pick the documents that work together based on complexity and risk. As you can see, the short form agreements, the A105 and the B105, are for the less complex, low risk projects. The B104 and A104 can be used for that mid-range. And then, of course, the 101, the 103, and the A101, 102, 103 are more appropriate for the more complex and higher risk projects. And to some degree, complexity and risk is in the eyes of the beholder. There's no clear point of demarcation between how much risk or what level of complexity. It's something that the parties have to be comfortable with. You have to be comfortable dealing with the short form and the notion that not everything is spelled out in a B105 like it is in a B101 or B103. So each person's going to have their different tolerances for complexity and risk, but overall, we think those are the elements that play into how to make a decision with these documents. So what we've talked about so far often deals with a one-off situation. I've got a project. I need to engage an architect to design the project and help me with the procurement or bidding phase, and then do some contract administration perhaps. But we know that it is common practice for owners often to engage architects and or contractors, architects to engage consultants and contractors to engage subs in the master agreement and work or service order contracting situation. And by that we mean a scenario in which the parties, perhaps the owner and architect, enter into a master agreement which has all of the basic business terms that they want to govern their relationship across perhaps a series of projects. And then for each project or each endeavor, they will enter into a work order if it's the construction side, or service order if it's architectural services, service order if it's going to be between an architect and its consultant. And that allows the parties to have a basic working framework in place, and then all they have to do is memorialize certain key terms like the scope of the endeavor, compensation, time, etc. And they can continue to work together on various projects over the lifetime of this master agreement through the use of service orders or work orders. So this is a listing of the master agreements that we have. You can see we have a master agreement between an owner and a contractor, and a work order that goes with that. We have a master agreement between an owner and architect for services, and service order that goes with that document. And then we have similarly a master agreement between a contractor and a sub, and the work order, and a master agreement between an architect and consultant and the service order there. So this way if as architects, you have a particular relationship with an owner, rather than negotiating or renegotiating a B101 or even a B105 multiple times, you can say, look, we both agree that these are great working terms. We've negotiated everything. We've made some edits to this master agreement that you like, that we can live with project to project. Why don't we just enter this agreement? And then each time you want to engage us to do design work or whatever, we can simply enter into a work order that will be governed by the terms of the master agreement, and it'll simplify and quicken our ability to get through the contracting phase of these engagements and get right to the work. And so there are a number of them that work, and these have been fairly popular documents. So what are the business terms that you might find in the master agreement? Well, the master agreement is going to cover things like how are disputes between the parties going to be resolved? Are we going to require mediation or not? Do we want arbitration, or is it going to go to litigation? How might the parties terminate this relationship? And what happens to a work order that's in process, a service order, if the parties decide, look, this is no longer working out? What are the obligations there? Who owns the instruments of service and how do they get used? That's just a few of the things that would be covered inside the master agreement and would be consistent project to project, engagement to engagement, unless the parties alter that somehow in the service order or work order that is specific to the engagement. It's important to note that the master agreement is not written to cover the scope of services or work for a particular engagement, or the compensation, and I'll add to this, or the time allowed. That's something that would be particular to each of the engagements. The work order is an integral part of the ultimate creation of the contract. It goes with a master agreement, but it's important to note a contract, a binding contract between the parties, isn't formed until the work or service order is actually executed, right? So if you think about it, your master agreement has a bunch of terms, but it doesn't have some of the key things that we talked about. It doesn't have scope. It doesn't have compensation. It doesn't have time for performance. Those are critical elements for the formation of a contract. And so you need the service order or work order to bind with the terms of the master agreement. And when you complete the terms of the service order in conjunction with a master agreement, that's when you have a binding agreement for the scope of services outlined in that service order. And again, with each slide, you can see we talk a little bit more about what's in the work order. Also, it's important to note that at least under our master agreements scenario, the owner's not obligated to issue work or service orders, and the parties are not obligated to accept all work orders or service orders that the other party might propose to them. So you can have a series of engagements with an owner, and then the owner might ask you to perform design services or whatever in an area that you just don't have expertise, you don't feel comfortable with, or your firm may be too busy to take that engagement and do it well. And so you can decline the proposed work service order. You don't have to take it. Let's talk a little bit about residential design and construction. In 2021, we issued a new pairing of documents designed specifically to be used in the custom residential realm. So we have the A110, which is the standard form of agreement between owner and contractor for a custom residential project, and the related B110, standard form of agreement between the owner and architect for a custom residential project. The A110 is built largely on the chassis of the A104 agreement, but there are modifications and additional terms in there that are targeted specifically for the custom residential world. Among other things, for example, the A110 is going to prompt the parties to include any particular Consumer Protection Act requirements or other jurisdictional requirements for residential construction. Uh, Again, recognizing that there are some nuances between residential construction and commercial construction. The same is true for the B110. It's built on the chassis of the B101, but it's got prompts for elements that might be particular to custom residential work. I would note that like the 104, A104, B104, and A105, B105, the A110, the B110 incorporates the general conditions elements that are otherwise found in the A110. The A110 also allows for delivery from the contractor, either in terms of a stipulated sum or under cost plus, with or without a guaranteed maximum price contracting. So again, those are new, and we think that small firms and others that work in the custom residential world will find them interesting and useful. They are significant contracts. We had a small working group that worked on them, but each of the members of that working group, their practice focused on custom residential work, and they understand the significance of having mature, well-drafted, and comprehensive contracts, and so these custom residential documents are meaty and are intended to answer a lot of questions that folks might have, because as you know, in custom residential work, they can be complex. The projects can be complex. There can be a lot of money at stake, particularly if we're talking about individual owners putting up that kind of money. And oftentimes there's considerable emotional elements involved in it. And so having a comprehensive, detailed contract can be important under those circumstances. A few years ago, we also published for the first time a residential design build agreement. This is the A145 is intended to serve in a situation where the owner wants to engage a design builder to design and construct a residence. And so we have that. I mentioned it to you. The benefits, it was specifically developed for residential design build. It's a shorter form. It's about 15 pages. There's one exhibit, and that's the design build amendment. And this envisions a scenario where the owner would engage the design builder. The design builder would work with the owner to flesh out the owner's requirements and criteria. And then ultimately, when the owner is satisfied that the design builder understands the concept, understands what they want, can produce the final design and then build, they would enter into a design build amendment that would memorialize the key terms of what the design should include and incorporate what the price will be to construct and the time frame, among other things. Again, here's a slide that just walks you through the process. The initial information set out in the agreement. The owner and the design builder meet to develop the owner's criteria. The owner's criteria is approved by the owner before the design phase begins, and then you enter into the design build amendment to set the sum and schedule. This, like the custom residential documents we just talked about, this document has specific prompts that are specific to residential work. for jurisdictional requirements for things that have to be spelled out and disclosed to an owner. And here, lien rights, warranties, and some other stuff are also covered in the document, so that the owner is well informed, and also to prompt the design builder to make sure that they've covered what might be required in a specific jurisdiction in residential construction contracts. We talked about the B102 a little bit before, an agreement that doesn't have a predefined scope of services. Let's talk about some pre-written or developed scopes that the AIA contract documents program offers that might be paired with that B102, or might otherwise be used even if you have a B101 and you want to provide services that are above and beyond the standard 5 phases. So again, as I said, the B102 is the agreement without a scope of services. You add one of these and you create a complete agreement. These are this is the table of articles within the A102, I mean the B102, I'm sorry. And so you can see what is covered in the B102. And then you can bind one of these scope of services documents to complete the scope, one or more. And you can see there's a whole range of potential services covered by these various scopes. Some folks do historic pres work, and so you might want to just use the B102 along with the historic preservation scope, and that might be an entree to the project, right? You might start with that, and then ultimately, based on the relationship that's developed between you and the owner, you may ultimately be asked to do the whole project, and you could just bolt on another one if you want, the B201, which is design and CA services, or something else. You might just be engaged to do programming, or you might come on simply to work on the project in order to get LEED certification or some other type of certification. So these are the scopes, and you can, again, use them with the B102, or you could also bolt some of these on to a B101 if you're going to do things like historic preservation or detailed programming, or provide some other services that might not be covered by the general scope of the 5 phases of services that you find in the B101. All right, so let's talk a little bit about sustainable projects and the AIA Sustainable Projects exhibit. So here's a little history of the way the AIA Contract Documents Program has evolved to address significant elements of sustainable design and construction. In what's not shown on here, and I'll start with, in 2007, the Documents Committee decided to put in just 1 or 2 very basic paragraphs about some high-level obligations of the architect when it came to sustainable design. To consider alternative building materials and so forth. It was again 1 or 2 paragraphs, not very detailed. But recognizing that sustainable design and construction was growing in popularity, and that while perhaps not the majority of project owners, many project owners and many architects wanted to be more engaged with sustainable design and construction and incorporate more elements of sustainable design and construction into the projects. We created a sustainable projects guide, which at that time basically suggested ways in which key documents, the B101, the A101, A102, might be edited to enhance the level of sustainable design and construction being incorporated in the project. And quite honestly, that guide was really, really well received, with one criticism. Why do we have to cut and paste from the guide into the standard documents? Why don't you all just create documents that do it all? And so on the heels of the guide, we created an entirely separate version of several of the key documents that integrated right in the standard text all of the elements that we had written about in the guide and that the parties might want to have for more sustainable design and construction elements in the project. And as those grew in popularity, and as it came time for us to review and revise them, somebody said, do we really need two flavors of every key document across multiple delivery models? Or would it be feasible simply to create an exhibit that could be bolted on to the variety of documents in a delivery model or multiple delivery models that will do the same thing, that will incorporate the necessary terms and conditions into whatever agreement it's bolted onto, and that led to the development of the sustainable project exhibit. But I will tell you that while some of the terms evolved a little bit over time, the sustainable project exhibit, the outline of it, stays true to the elements that were originally developed when we talked about the guide, and then what we envisioned for changes to the documents. And that overall process includes identification of a sustainable objective for the project, whether it's some sort of certification or whether there are other elements of sustainability that an owner wants for either a new building or a renovation. You know, do they want reduced energy costs? Do they want some sort of carbon neutral building or environment? Do they want to ensure that that there are certain low VOC materials used, or etc. So you identify the sustainable objective, and then parties identify sustainable measures that each of the parties will be responsible for implementing, that if implemented properly should lead to achieving the sustainable objective. The details get rolled up into a sustainability plan where the sustainable measures are assigned to each party and details are put around how to achieve those sustainable measures. The exhibit also talks about how to handle the responsibilities associated with obtaining a sustainability certification, like who's going to handle what if we're submitting to USGBC for LEED or whatever. How's the sustainability documentation going to be handled, regardless of who the certifying authority is? Who's going to be responsible for compiling the documentation that needs to go to them, or the continuing obligation to submit after the project's complete, if you need to do that to continue to have the certification, and who's going to deal with the certifying authority. The architect's role in all of this is to lead the sustainability workshop with the owner and its representatives, among others, to draft and create the sustainability plan, which will ultimately become a contract document among all of the key players on the project, because the sustainability plan, as I said, is where the specific obligations for achieving the sustainable measures, where they're all designated, who's designated as the responsible party and what their obligations are. The architect incorporates the necessary elements of sustainability into the design during the design process. The architect may also be tasked with overseeing certain elements of the construction process to make sure that items that are necessary to achieve the sustainable objective are actually being incorporated into the construction. And by default, the architect has the primary point of contact with the certifying authority. The contractor and owner are obligated to follow the sustainability plan and perform the sustainability measures as assigned to them. Um, they have obligations that continue through certification and even beyond, including each of them may have obligations to create and provide the documentation that the certifying authority is going to need in order to evaluate the application for certification. All right. And so that's an overview of, I'm sorry, that's an overview of where we've gone with all of this. I'm going to now turn things over to Molly to take you through the purchasing and use elements of the AIA's documents. And Molly, for the life of me,
I
I'm
got
not.
it. You're all good. I was
All
able to
right.
take over for you, so you're good.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome. So I know we only have a few minutes left in our session, so I will talk extremely quick. My name is Molly Richardson. I am the Training and Education Manager here at AIA Contract Documents. So I'm just going to talk about a few of our resources and pricing and information to help. So with our documents, we do have three pricing options. A lot of the things that Ken talked about, there's three ways to access these documents. We have a one-time use document. So basically this is non-editable. You would just purchase the document, you would input your project data, but you cannot edit the legal language. We also have a customizable single document. This would be our one-time use editable option. And basically what you can do is you can finalize it one time. It does allow you access to our online service where you can edit the legal language, change any project details, but you can only finalize that document one time into that locked PDF. And then we have an unlimited access annual subscription. You can do individual or multi-user licenses available. This gives you access to over 200 agreements and forms, fully editable. You can make custom documents, and if you're an AIA member, you do receive a discount on your product. To purchase any of this, we have our new, you would just go to our AIAcontracts.com. It is our new website. From there, you can simply browse our contracts by various filters. You can also purchase annual subscriptions directly from the home page. One great feature about our product is we do offer an online service basics training that is led by me. So you get to follow along with the trainer, and I'm going to go through a lot of good steps with that online service. The registration link is hyperlinked into this presentation, but if you have any questions, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen. And then quickly, just some contacts and resources. So Ken gave some really great information throughout this presentation. One resource that can help is we do have this small firms guide. Again, this is hyperlinked right here into your presentation. You can find this PDF under handouts on your GoToWebinar browser bar that pops up. It will also be emailed to you along with a recording of this presentation a few days after today. And so just make sure the purpose of this guide is to provide a comprehensive list of all AIA resources for small project practitioners, including small firms, sole practitioners, and custom residential architects. And then just some contacts and information. I would definitely take a screenshot of this page, save it. Just if you have any questions or you need to reference any materials, we have our homepage, our Learn page where you can find more webinars, old webinars on demand, trainings, articles, lots of great information. If you are along the way have any questions about our documents, please reach out to docinfo@aiacontracts.com. And if you have any questions about purchasing or technical support, please reach out to support@aiacontracts.com. Now, one thing I want to point out before I end this webinar, I do know some really great questions came through. One during this presentation, and I know we completely ran out of time with Ken's great content. I have recorded any question I have not responded to in the question bar, and I will try to reach out with an answer for you within the next week or so. So I do apologize. That we did not have time to answer any of those questions today, but thank you for submitting those, and we'll be sure to get back in touch with you. At that point, I am going to end the webinar. Thank you so much for your time and your interest in AIA contract documents, and I hope you have a great day.